In this unit in W203, we're looking at a collection of short stories by Jo Campbell, particularly two shorter, like two-page fictions. As you're thinking about writing flash fiction or minute fictions, I think it's worth looking at how Campbell uses character, plot, and language in these stories to build a narrative. First story I want to look at is on page 173. It's called My Bliss. It's interesting, like just the sounds in this piece. And I just read a few lines. First, I married the breakfast cereal in its small cardboard chapel, wax coated, into which I poured milk. Then I married a cigarette for the gauzy way the air hung around us when we were together, then a stone because I thought he was a brick or a block, something I could use to build a home. There was a bird, but flying away repeatedly as grounds for divorce. The shrub was a lost cause from the get-go, and the TV gave me marital tension headaches. The kidney was dull, the liver was slick, the car was exhausting, the monster in the woodshed scared the children, though I found his stink enticing. The teacup was all filling, emptying, and filling. So it's interesting, like in this story, how the character exists, as one thing among many. Here, that the I is there and has kind of an equal substance with the breakfast cereal, the milk, the cigarette, the stone. All of those things, are kind of gathered around it, like it's a sense of like a constellation of stars, right? Where the I is one thing among many. It's interesting how the story kind of is rooted in this narrator's experience of the world like that, as one thing among many. The I develops a sense of awareness here in the world that's focused through an experience of desire, right? All these failed connections, all these failed relationships with the world and with things that ends up in the bar, right? As we get to the end of the story on page 174, she writes, and then a slim-hipped, quiet confidence leaned against the wall of the lamplighter lounge, chalking a pool cue, and I said, Lordy, this is for real. He ran the table, and I fanned myself with a Bell's beer coaster. This was going to last. I called home and divorced a plate of meatloaf. Confidence gave me a good couple of months. I learned aloof and not eating in public, but it didn't last. He wasn't from the Midwest, and besides, tied to a bar stool across the room, some drunk, seeing-eyed dog was already starting to chew the fishnet stockings off a lady's artificial leg. So what's real and what's not in the story, right? What does the narrator connect to as real? What is the narrator not able to connect to in the end? It's really interesting how this story works as more like a prose poem, right? It stirs up your sense of the world. It stirs up the way you place yourself within the world, how you place yourself within the way you describe yourself through language. So by the time you get to the end of the story, you're not really sure what's real and what's not. For the narrator here, it's a good question. Another one of the short stories here is Sleepover. The first story in the collection begins on page 13, and to read a few lines from it, and we'll discuss it. Ed and I were making out by candlelight on the couch. Pammy was in my bedroom with Ed's brother. She wanted to be in the dark because her face was broke out. We were wishing your head could be on Pammy's body, Ed said. You two together would make the perfect girl. I took it as a compliment. Unlike Pammy, I was flat-chested. Ed kissed my mouth, my throat, my collarbone. He pressed his pelvis into mine. The full moon over the driveway reminded me of a single headlamp or a giant eyeball. Note the narrator's self-awareness within this story as well, right? How it's defined through the experience with the boys, the experience of connecting with Pammy, how she is, as a part of this one big world of desire and sexuality as the story unfolds. It's interesting whether that sense of desire unites her to the world or brings her into a connection with those around her, or connection with the world around her, or whether it kind of takes her apart bit by bit. That's particularly interesting, like when you get to the end of the story and you see that that she and Pammy at the end of all this are watching Frankenstein. So you have that interesting parallel between Ed's comment, "You two together would make the perfect girl," one girl's head put on the other girl's body, versus the assembled monster in the movie that they're watching on TV, the black and white movie that they're watching on TV. As Pammy says later, "Too bad this show isn't in color while we were watching Frankenstein." While the doctor was still cobbling together body parts, Pammy fell asleep with her small, pretty feet on my lap. I stayed awake, though, and saw the men from the town band together to kill the monster. It's how the eye, places herself within, this activity. It pushes you to kind of rethink the beginnings and endings of the story, right? Does the story start in the middle of the two couples making out in the house with mom gone? Does the tension of the story begin there, or does the tension of the story begin when mom returns and speaks to the girls? "You girls are going to ruin your eyes," she says. Does the story begin or end with the boy's flight, or how does the narrator's kind of awareness of this world kind of get folded into the black and white movie on TV, Frankenstein, and the action there? Where does the movie's world start, and where does it end? Where does the girl's world start and end in some ways? She kind of emerges herself within this wider world. In terms of fiction itself, it's one of those things that Campbell's and storytellers and narrators do really well, is that sense of how they have a distinct awareness of the world, and how they explore that consciousness of how they're in the world, the points of conflict that they navigate, and how they define themselves against that sense of conflict, of loss, of desire, all of those kinds of basic experiences that we all feel. In a longer story, Campbell does this in a series of scenes where a narrator is taking care of a dog who reminds her of an ex-lover. You can read My Dog Roscoe as a sequence of smaller scenes here, where the narrator has a growing sense of awareness, or maybe you read it as a dissolving sense of self-awareness. It begins from the story's very first sentence. Back on page 65, Campbell writes, "As my big sister predicted from her cell in the county jail, I became pregnant early into my marriage to Pete, the electrician. That tarot reading Lydia did for me was the last before one of her cellmates reported her so-called satanic activities to the authorities and got her cards taken away. Just when I was starting to show a stray dog, bigger than a cocker spaniel, smaller than a retriever, white with black pepper spots and a black circle around one eye, appeared at the back door of the house that Pete and I were renting with an option to buy." Where does the story begin here? Does it begin with the dog's appearance? Does it begin with the pregnancy, with the sister's prophecy? And what, and so that it kind of disrupts that sense of where a story begins and where it ends, and complicates our sense of that easy plotting of the world. The whole story proceeds within this central triangle there between Pete, the narrator, and the dog Roscoe, who stands in for the narrator's ex-boyfriend. The question within this triangle is whether it ever gets resolved. The dog is hit by a car, and she's afraid the dog has died, but they take him to the vet, and the dog is on the table there. On page 83, tell me whether you think this story resolves itself or not. "Are you sure you still want a dog?" Pete asked. "He chewed up my new boot last night. I'll show you when we get home. I'm not very happy with this little fellow right now." For a few moments I'd given Roscoe up for dead, but I wouldn't let him go again if I could help it. Things were not finished between us. If I kept him in his place as a dog, he could be a comforting presence, a living reminder of the troubles I'd left behind and the good life I had chosen instead. As a dog, he could be devoted and companionable. He listened when I talked to him, and he'd always been good with children. There was nothing wrong with a woman having it all, was there? "Of course we'll take the appointment," I said, and to Pete I added, "If you want, we can have him sleep in a crate so he doesn't chew anything else up." Roscoe gazed miserably at me from the exam table, but I smiled at Pete. The dog's welfare was in my hands now. I put one arm around my shining husband, and I placed my other hand on my belly, where I sensed a sweet sigh of relief. How do you resolve or read that resolution in that final paragraph there, right? Is this a happy ending, right? Usually, a reader's response to this dying or dead dog story, right, is that sense of tragedy and loss, right? But here you've got this strange sense in which the narrator is going to hang on to the dog, keep the dog alive, to be reminded of the ex, and to be reminded of the bad times as she tries to endure the good times. Which one is she more connected to in the end? It's a point of complication that rises up in all of Campbell's stories. How we're attached to this world, and the kinds of things that we let go to find that attachment. I hope you enjoy exploring a similar sense of consciousness within the flash fictions that you're writing now.